it's obviously very important. There's a short answer to it, which is that almost all of it is politics, and especially if somebody is from backgrounds where the political determines their daily life worlds, as is the case with me, as would be the case with most people in this country statistically, right? Like, because the Dalit Bahujan Adivasi constitutes about 80% of this population, right? So people who are like me, for people like us, the political definitely dictates our everyday life. So whatever research sort of comes out of it, whatever praxis sort of comes out of it, is thoroughly embedded in that logic, right? I guess one of the most obvious examples to give in this scenario would be the case of Dr. Ambedkar when he returned from Cambridge to Baroda for his office, for his work under the Baroda king, the king of Baroda, right? Shahuji Maharaj. So when he came to Baroda, he this was a sort of pact, this was a pact condition for him to get a full scholarship, that he would come back and work here. But then when he went to work there, he did not find a place to stay, right? And he had to take the name of he had to take a Parsi sounding name to get a house. But then even then he was discovered that this is not actually a Parsi man, so he was kicked out of that house. He was threatened to be evacuated from that house, and that led to him having to travel much more to work where he was supposed to work, right? So these small ways in which these choices of how the political shapes one's, not just one's imaginary, but also one's active daily choices, so that's a very, very crucial factor in that way. I think that the sort of the example that I keep always giving when it comes to how disproportionate the dynamics is in favor of a certain kind of art and against certain kind of art, and the grift that still exists, is the example of Jangat Singh Shyam, who's again a fantastic artist who was from who was an Adivasi person, and he sort of again his artworks now, and this was an artist who was prominent in 1970s, 1980s, and he died due to exploitation by this very industry. And his works, the way the artworks supposed to function is that when an artist is dead, that's when they start becoming their works start becoming valuable. But the alarming fact is that Jangat Singh Shyam's artworks, even now 35-40 years after his death, still cost a fraction of what most living upper caste artists' works cost, right? So there is this really, really large distance that we have to travel before any kind of an egalitarian space can be constructed. And a lot of my practice, especially through my online interventions, especially through my engagement with new media, etc., is to find strategies as to how we can construct this counter public, right? That's the important thing to do, because again the status quo has actively paid IT cells. The status quo has infrastructure which is deeply in its favor, which automatically sort of aligns with itself, right? And to have again to sort of foreground the struggles, to sort of construct frames of resistance, the development of these strategies in new media is where the sort of crux of our zeitgeist lies. I think one of the most unexpected but remarkable sort of changes that has happened now is that people are listening to podcasts, right? 5 years ago, we would not have thought that people would go back to listening to what is essentially long form radio, right? Which sort of dies in 1970s, right? After that, we would not expect people to have the attention span or the capacity to hear these long rambling conversations that are happening essentially on the radio, right? So the fact that these new medias emerge like through confluences that we can't predict, and they fundamentally shape how we think, like because our knowledge structures are so deeply rooted now in what we absorb through podcasts, right? That is where the sort of crux of new media lies, right? Because we don't know 5 years from now what's going to happen. Like 5 years ago, it almost felt like Facebook is where everything is, but Facebook is almost like obsolete now, except for like certain like older generation people using it, right? And for Facebook Marketplace, right? Like there are newer apps that will emerge. There would be newer ways of engaging with media that would obviously emerge, and they would become more relevant, and what we now consider as infallible would become obsolete, right? So that's where like sort of, critically looking at new media, it becomes not just imperative for students, but I guess for everybody who wishes to be engaged in how the world functions, right? That's again like a very complicated question, but I would, I guess, go back to the example that I took of long form radio journalism, which we thought is never going to come back, and it has. So we wouldn't be sure, like of what odd sort of like, constellation of like factors is going to lead to any kind, like some kind of a resurrection. And I guess in one way we can be optimistic by learning from history, because most things go in and out of fashion. So chances are that, like the things that feel critical and almost calamitous now would perhaps seem like a fad in some time in the near future. So I guess that, and this is also where like, being a historian of media becomes a crucial fact, right? Because there are so many, like we would be studying TikTok as something of the past in the very next decade, not like, 100 years from now, right? So that goes on to show how like, like being historians in this way, like being like students of new media is where one needs to delve into.